There's this bloke that I follow who goes by the name of Zuby. At Zuby Music is the name of his account. It's likely that you've heard of him, since he's a fairly big fish on Twitter and increasingly on YouTube. But when I first decided to waste a good proportion of my time by signing up to the Frankenstein's monster creation of Jack Dorsey, he was one of the first people I began to follow. And there are many reasons. Firstly, he was a blackfellow who was quite vocal in his repudiation of the ridiculous everything is racist narrative. Now, as a person who believes that people of all shades and colours should be able to rub along quite nicely, this was appealing to me. In fact, it was more than appealing. Since Britain, along with much of the West, has been reeling from the relentless attacks of the race baiters and race vultures like Ash Sarkar, Professor of Black Studies Kahindi Andrews, and my personal favourite ungracious and resentful ray of sunshine, Yasmin Alibi Brown, I often cast around for confirmation that black people don't actually hate me. The resurgent phenomenon of Black Lives Matter last year has caused me to widen my search for such people, and I am now more acquainted both with the towering intellect of somebody like Thomas Sowell, as well as the musings of the wise beyond her years Dominique Samuels, who has been a regular contributor on British media lately. But back to Zuby. Not only was he not a victim of racism, he appears not to be a victim of any kind, and is instead that thing that is heartening to witness. A young man, seemingly only by the force of his personality, achieving considerable success on his own terms. He's an Oxford University graduate who ditched his corporate job and struck out on his own to follow his dreams. He's a rapper who's released several albums and yet rarely swears and has fingers in many pies, including some cryptocurrencies, is an evangelist for diet and personal fitness, and has achieved the thing that donates someone in the 21st century who has truly arrived. He's appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast. He is also demonstrably a free thinker and has repeatedly expressed his frustration with the irrational, illogical, unscientific and anti-freedom policy of lockdowns, masks and forced vaccinations. And although I'm close to 20 years older than him, and am therefore not in his target market of those who would describe him as inspirational, he is nevertheless an impressive figure, and it's good to see someone like him have such influence. But this post is not about Zuby. You know, I used to be proud of this country. Well, perhaps proud is too strong a word. It's too specific. It kind of suggests that I personally have done something concrete that makes it something to be proud of. When the truth is that whilst we all make up what a country is, only a vanishingly small minority of people actually make any real difference. Our country is bigger than, and by extension, more impressive than any of us as individuals. As such, patriotism is often a refuge from our own mediocrity. And the more powerful, richer and more impressive the country, the more this is true. But as I've aged, I've come to realise that my patriotism is less a feeling of pride and more just a feeling of luck, or more precisely, gratitude. I feel, or have felt, lucky to have been born into a country such as this. And I'm grateful for that fact. I'm grateful for all sorts of things. Grateful for those that I love and those who love me, obviously. But also grateful for practical wonders like electricity and hot and cold running water. Grateful always to have had a roof over my head, always a warm bed to sleep in, and grateful that I don't think I've ever missed a meal in the approximately 19,500 days that I've been on this earth. Had I been born in Cambodia, Western Sahara or Chad, that might not have been the case. But I also have gratitude for the fact that I was born into a country that not only provided for my physical needs, but one that also catered to my humanity and my spirit. I've been able to have a say in who governs me. Not much of one, admittedly, but as much as anyone else. My physical being and my property have been protected by laws. My right to protest has been assumed as a default. I have been entitled to a fair trial if ever I was accused of wrongdoing by a jury of my peers. I have been at liberty to live my life as I choose, so long as it does not impact unduly upon others. In short, I have been free. Am I proud of that? Sure. But mostly I'm filled with gratitude that those that came before me have constructed a society in which all of those things can happen. And when one is grateful, one is, by implication, indebted. I am and will always be in debt to those who came before me and built this free and prosperous, chaotic and vibrant, ramshackle, inefficient, old-fashioned, rainy but beautiful and fertile rock in the North Atlantic. So how are we to pare down this debt? Since we've already established that the debt is so great that we'll never discharge it completely, we must instead service it. We must make regular contributions, regular repayments. So many of us have thought that by voting, that was all we needed to do. Many of us don't even do that, and of those of us that do at least that minimal thing, we still often don't even bother to vote in local and regional elections. Now, this is not good enough. This is just like paying the minimum on a credit card. It gets them off your back, but your debt climbs relentlessly upwards. Eventually, you reach your credit limit. Now, immigrant communities, often brought up in societies where they really had no say, instinctively understand this in a way that we, as the host nation, do not. These immigrant communities, and I have in mind one particular faith-based community that often laughably has the words of peace added to it as a way of deflecting its real agenda, use the democratic infrastructure that was built by our forefathers to advance their cause. In a sense, there's nothing wrong with that, since politics is nothing but a competition, a battle even, of ideas. But if one side doesn't show up, the side that did wins by default. No matter how moribund, vile or despicable their ideas, they win. That's why you've suddenly got a mosque built next to your house. I once read someone putting forth the argument that E.L. James, the author of the female soft porn sensation 50 Shades of Grey, is a better writer than 99% of people. Now, out of a kind of morbid curiosity, I read a bit of it, and it is awful, terrible even, particularly to someone whose favourites include Raymond Chandler, Graham Greene and George Orwell. The comparison is so outlandish, it is an insult to mention her in the same breath. But in a sense it is true. Chandler and Orwell are obviously in a different universe, let alone league, but she's a better writer than me, because she's done it and I haven't. She is now a multi-millionaire, and I'm still a jobbing plumber. The demands for a mosque and a Sharia enclave are the 50 Shades of Grey of democratic involvement. St Paul's Cathedral, the Forth Bridge and the Royal Crescent in Bath are what we could do if we bothered to turn up to the council meeting. But we don't. So what we get is young women being called slags as they walk home from work because they've got an ankle showing. It's a clumsy analogy, but you get my drift. We haven't been making the repayments. We haven't been maintaining what we have, what we were bequeathed. Why? Probably because when you are raised in a free country, that's the norm. Freedom will always be there, or so we think. And so we reason it doesn't actually need defending. But it does. It absolutely does. And never has it needed defending more than it does now, during an emergency. It always needs defending in an emergency, in a supposed pandemic, when we are supposed to be putting our shoulders to the wheel and all pulling in the same direction, if I can mix my metaphors. What if we're all going in the wrong direction? It's all very well invoking the Dunkirk spirit, but what if what we are being asked to do is in fact the opposite of the Dunkirk spirit? In May 1940, in an inversion of normal warfare, ordinary civilians were encouraged to put themselves at risk to save professional soldiers, and they answered in their thousands. Today, however, people are being encouraged to save lives by cowering indoors and behind masks. If heroism were that easy, we'd all be doing it, and most of us are acting as if it is as easy as that. Heroism, which used to include, amongst other things, sailing an unarmed fishing boat to France, whilst dodging Stuka dive bombers and strafing Messerschmitts in order to rescue stranded and exhausted British soldiers, is not what it was. The bar has been set pretty low in the last year or so. Because what we have been encouraged to do is not to risk and sacrifice our bodies and our lives, but instead our rights and our freedoms. Millions face machine guns to protect those nebulous and intangible things, and now people are traduced and insulted as being selfish for refusing to relinquish them without question and without a fight. But part of what constitutes making those repayments is in defending those things that are timelessly valuable at a time when it is unpopular to do so. That's part of the cost of living in a free society, because as the t-shirt slogan so succinctly puts it, freedom isn't free. We must keep the standard of freedom flying, all the more so when few are following it. You can be assured that your conscience will reward you, as will those who momentarily forget its worth. Facing a bayonet takes a physical act of courage, but risking your reputation, your career and your very livelihood by going against the medical consensus, when you believe the consensus is wrong, takes no less, though it is a moral rather than a physical act, for both physical and moral courage are indispensable to a strong and healthy society. But is our society strong and healthy? Is it? If it is, what makes a society healthy? I could go on and on about democracy and the rule of law till I'm blue in the face, but we all know these things. We know all the important, major things. But what of the little things? The little things that work, that make the big things happen, that actually make countries functional. A telephone infrastructure that enables emergency calls to be made, 999 in the UK, 911 in many other countries. The fact that every electrical socket in the country uses the same 3-pin plug. The understanding that all traffic on the main road has right of way, but that people, and not vehicles, have the right of way on a pedestrian crossing, which may be a particularly British thing. And what about that most British of all things? Forming an orderly queue. Like those other things, queuing doesn't make a country or a society great or glorious, but it does help it to function, and function in an organic way, without the need for state intervention. It's often been said that the British like to queue, and it is easy to sneer at this example of social conformity, but we queue in order to make things, well, orderly. It follows the rule of first come, first served, and everybody understands the rules. It is not written anywhere in law that people must queue. It is merely understood, and is an expression of that most admirable of traits, fairness. Italians, for all their obvious qualities and their enviable devil-may-care approach to things like traffic rules, do not know how to queue. An Italian queue is this shape. It's no wonder they are so passionate in their temperament. Who wouldn't be with all that pushing and shoving and cutting in line? But a British queue is an example of order in action, and even when there is a large non-linear space, like an airport departure lounge or a railway station concourse where there is no line to follow, and the queue could break down. We Brits make it work, usually by snaking it back and forth across the space. I won't go all Shude's corner on you and say that it is a thing of beauty, but it is a thing of both fairness and efficiency. And in normal times it would be something to applaud in the British character. But these are not normal times. These are not normal times at all. These are, by contrast, the most abnormal times that I've ever lived through. And just like when the much vaunted German quality of efficiency in making things is directed towards making war, a virtue can easily, and quite suddenly, become a vice. And it is this virtue turned vice of social conformity that has been used against us in our hysterical, illogical and shamefully illiberal response to COVID-19. And it was our propensity for orderly queuing that finally led good-natured Zuby to abandon us Brits. I follow quite a few people on Twitter, so it's not as if I hang on his every word, but I did notice his tweet where he said, "My last few months in the UK, there were better places for me." And I noticed the tone, as someone who has been quite gracious about the opportunities that this old white country has afforded this young black man. I sensed a resignation, a disappointment even. I responded by speculating that he was leaving to pursue a life in a place that valued freedom more, like we used to. He liked my tweet, which suggested I wasn't wrong. And sure enough, a few days later, he tweeted this: a visual representation of why I don't want to live in the UK anymore, accompanying a clip of shoppers obediently following the arrows stuck to the floor outside Primark in the Merry Hill shopping centre. And this wasn't an orderly queue made out of necessity and fairness. Whoever queued to go to Primark? It's not passport control, it's Primark. You just go through the doors. But someone comes along and sticks arrows to the floor and people follow them, mindlessly. One wonders if they stuck arrows to go off a cliff, would people still follow them? In the time of COVID, I'm not completely convinced that they wouldn't. And I felt sad about this. Not only sad about the fact that my compatriots have become so embarrassingly obedient, but that this young man, still so full of promise, energy and goodwill, had become so disillusioned with the country of his birth that it could offer him no future, or at least no future that he wanted. Now, Zuby, despite being familiar on social media, is not a national figure, but his departure is a negative nonetheless. He soundly rejected the dishonest and divisive message of Black Lives Matter, when he could quite easily have jumped on the bandwagon and maybe sold more albums. But he didn't do that. He seemed, and I can't say this categorically, but he seemed to appreciate and have an affection for this country. And that's no small thing. It's no small thing for a black man to take such a position. It's no small thing because with him leaving, that's one less black man to counter the hateful messaging of critical race theory. That's one less grateful, successful black man to serve as inspiration to prevent maybe other young men, black or white, from becoming resentful victims. That's no small thing at all. And so we lose a champion of the best and the most hopeful of ideas. A champion that says that skin colour really doesn't matter, rather than that it matters more than anything. And we also lose, which is probably worse for society as a whole, a champion for freedom into the bargain. And we can ill afford to lose such men at present. What I fear is that, as more and more people who want to live freely realise that they cannot do so here, we will experience a liberty drain in a similar way that much of the third world experiences a brain drain as the developed world hoovers up their most qualified and leaves a failed, impoverished state in their wake. This freedom drain will almost certainly be to what I call the freedom states of America. Those that have rescinded all lockdown restrictions return to being truly free societies, and even, in some cases like Texas and Florida, actually outlawing the requirement for vaccine passports. If I was a betting man, I will guess that Zuby will be relocating to Texas when he cuts the ties that bind him to Britain. What I also fear is that Zuby, and those others like him, having escaped Her Majesty's prison United Kingdom, will tell their newfound hosts that the British don't value freedom anymore. I fear that our image as a place where freedom for the common man was born, grew and matured over 8 centuries and was exported to all corners of the globe will instead be replaced by something inglorious, meaner and distinctly more pinched. I fear that this could become a vicious cycle where the freedom lovers who can leave do so and encourage others to do likewise, whilst those like me who cannot are forced to stay, where we become a smaller and smaller minority in a population of dominant busybodies, authoritarians and fascists who will force conformity upon the rest of us. Because Zuby and those like him who love freedom will fall out of love with those who don't, and considering the frankly pathetic way in which the British population has surrendered its freedoms without a fight thus far, I don't blame him. I wish I could sign off by saying, stay free, but I fear that if you want to, it may be that you can't stay here. Let's hope that that's not true.